So, welcome again, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we host climate scientist and visionary thinker, the Reverend Dr. Lisa Graumlich. Dr. Graumlich, who was recently ordained a deacon in the Episcopal Church, will discuss the latest news on climate science that we need to communicate to the public. She will then turn to the hope of recent transformative opportunities and what's on tap at the upcoming International Climate Conference, the COP, that will take place in Baku, Azerbaijan in November. And finally, as a person of faith and science, Dr. Graumlich will unpack what we can do in our own faith and spiritual communities. And the talk will be followed by a question and answer session. So as a housekeeping note for all of you, if you do have a question, please drop that into the Q&A function in Zoom so that we can keep track of them. And you can also drop those questions in. We're monitoring Facebook as well. So we'll do our best to get those questions answered after the talk concludes. So as we begin today, I do want to acknowledge that where I am here in Northern Virginia, as in every other part of the country, we are on Indigenous land. And I recognize that I live and work within the ancestral lands of the Manahawk people. I acknowledge the place-based knowledge of these peoples, and I'm grateful for their stewardship of these lands. And I invite you to place in the chat the name of the people whose land you rely upon now. So I want to invite you to do that. And I'm also dropping into the chat for you a link if you're not sure what ancestral lands you are on. There is a link to a native land map where you can find more information and learn more about the people whose land you rely upon. So again, welcome, Lisa. I'm very excited to host you today. And I want to share an introduction with the folks who are joining us today so they can get to know a little bit about your background. But Dr. Lisa Graumlich earned an undergraduate degree in botany and a master's degree in geography from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. She earned a doctorate in forest resources from the University of Washington, and she is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Ecological Society of America, and the Aldo Leopold Leadership Program. She is the current president of the American Geophysical Union, or AGU. Dr. Graumlich's primary research interests are in paleontology and the ways that ecosystems and human societies adapt to climate change, with a special focus on severe and persistent drought. She pioneered the use of tree ring data to understand long-term trends in climate, focusing on the mountains of Western North America. And Dr. Graumlich has an interdisciplinary focus and a career-long interest in global climate change, especially regarding how to best manage natural and human resources in an uncertain future. And she speaks frequently on climate change impacts and adaptation. Dr. Graumlich is the first openly LGBTQ+ president of the American Geophysical Union. Throughout her career, Dr. Graumlich has demonstrated a strong commitment to increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. She was ordained last fall as a deacon in the Episcopal Church. So it is my deep pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Graumlich. We're so glad you're with us today, and we can't wait to hear what you have to share with us.
Well, Susan, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Hello to all the people out there in Zoom world, including some very, very dear old friends. I see you out there, and I'm so happy for your support now and in the past. So if I am clever enough, I'm going to be able to share my screen. Okay, technical people, where did that share? Here we go. And here we go with you'd think we'd be good at this after all these years of Zoom. No? Here we go. Okay.
Perfect.
Now, is that working?
It's working perfectly. Yes.
Okay, there's sort of annoying little menu bars, but let's go. Here we go. Okay. So as Susan mentioned, I'm a paleoclimatologist. I have used tree rings to reconstruct the temperature of the last 1,000 years. And I've worked in the high mountains of the West, including many years working with the National Park Service in Glacier National Park, using tree rings and records of glacial retreat to document human impacts on the climate system. So, given that, imagine my thrill. September of 1997, those of you of a certain vintage may recognize this scene. That is Vice President Gore standing in front of the Grinnell Glacier in Glacial National Park, 1977, and he is pointing at the glacier as the canary in the coal mine, signaling the dangers of climate change. And bear with me, his words at that press event are very resonant. I'm going to quote him. I have come here today because Glacier National Park faces a grave threat to its heritage, and it's one that can't be met with a simple restoration plan. The 50 glaciers in this park, which date back to the last ice age 10,000 years ago, are melting away at an alarming rate. Over the last century, we have lost nearly 3/4 of all the glaciers in this park. Grinnell Glacier has retreated by over 3,000 feet. What's happening at Glacier National Park is strong evidence of global warming over the past century, the disruption of our climate because of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere all over the world. The overwhelming evidence shows that global warming is no longer a theory, it's a reality. Greenhouse gases have risen at a record rate. The last few decades have been the warmest of this century, and the 10 warmest years in this century have all occurred since 1980. More than 2,000 scientists from all over the world on a special panel on climate change found the evidence shows, and I quote, a discernible human influence on global climate. So I was one of those 2,000 scientists in 1997 from all over the world. And we were thrilled. I can't tell you how excited we were to see the US in a leadership position as Gore headed to Kyoto for the UN Climate Change Conference. It was COP3. And he led the discussion about the Kyoto Protocol. And it was the first time nations in the world agreed to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. Okay, where we are today. If you look at this graph, you'll see global surface temperatures starting in 1850, going out to 2023. And if your eyes are good, you can see right around 1975 why this was a question. There's a lot of natural variability in this graph, but you can see that since 1977, when Gore stood in front of the Grinnell Glacier, the trend upward through time. And we know that 2024 has been the hottest temperatures on record. You know, if you think back, and once again, on this call, I'm sure some of you were there, we were talking about impacts on polar bears and trying to get the public excited about the polar bears wasn't always really effective. But climate change has hit home. So NOAA reports that last year, 2023, there were 28 weather and climate disasters in the United States, not just polar bears, in the United States, and that it surpassed the previous record of 22 disasters. And it was a price tag for us of 92 billion with a B, dollars. So as scientists, we continue over the decades to sound the alarm, but we've been joined by other voices, including those of you on this call, and arguing for, let me get to the next slide. Hang on. Oops. a kind of transformation that we need to actually address the phasing out of fossil fuels. And here I have a wonderful quote from such a leader in our field, Professor Johan Rockström. To return back to 1.5 by the end of the century requires that we do everything right. We need to phase out fossil fuels. We need to transform the global food system. We need to maintain all the carbon sinks and stocks on land and ocean and scaling carbon dioxide removal. Everything has to happen simultaneously. So what I hope to speak about today is how we take this momentum, this call for transformation, prepare ourselves as communities of faith to participate in COP29, either from your home or potentially some of you will be there. And what does it mean to continue to engage with this UN process? But to do it, what I want to do is give this talk in 3 parts. What are some key insights from the earth science community right now? So this is kind of hot off the press thinking. I want to ask the question, why do we engage with COP29? Susan will be there. I'm going to be there. Some of you will be there or talking about it. And then how do we move forward and serve our communities in this context? So here we go. What are, if you run into me on the street or at a party, like what is on the mind? What keeps climate scientists up late at night? So here you go. And you know what? I'm starting with science, knowing that I have at least one climate scientist on the Zoom call. And I'm going to be saying things that you probably have these same figures in your own slide deck. So for those of you that know this well, think of this as a way in which we convene together by starting with the science. And then for those of you who this is new material, would be happy to interact with you after the call to sort of go deeper into this. So this is kind of a quick trot through Lisa's personal nightmares. So here we go. Tipping points. There's a lot of talk about tipping points. What is a tipping point? It's when the change in part of a system becomes self-perpetuating beyond a threshold, leading to substantial, widespread, frequently abrupt, and often irreversible impact. So for those of you that think graphically, sometimes we think of this as like, the earth, our society, our life. We're kind of in a little dip in this system, that blue thing on the left. And we kind of oscillate between 2 stable states. We wake up in the morning, we're awake. We go to bed at night, we're asleep. From the earth, we have El Nino, we have La Nina. At longer time scales, we have glacial and we have interglacial, and we kind of move back and forth between these states. Sometimes because of positive and negative feedbacks and disruption in the system, that ability to move back and forth between those 2 states can become degraded. And if you look on the far right at this red dotted line, you think of this as when that disruption has been so profound that there's no going back to the previous state. So this is what, when scientists talk about tipping points, what are they talking about? So here we go. Oops. What this irreversible change could look like is shown on this global map. And I want to call your attention to, in particular, the tipping points that have the bright red. And so, you know what? This is what scientists do. We talk about tipping points become likely. We don't say that we know exactly what's going to happen. There's a likelihood statement there with a temperature of global warming and centigrade, doing the kindly annoying thing of talking centigrade, 3 to 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit for the global temperature. And you'll notice it's the ice sheets. And so why is it the ice sheets can become so unstable? And if you think about the feedbacks associated with that, you start to lose ice, you take this really bright white surface and turn it into a darker surface so it absorbs more solar radiation. That fresh water on the ice sheet once again creates rivers that start to erode away at the ice sheet. Global ocean rising kind of comes up beneath the ice sheet and that fresh water, and they start to unpin the West Antarctic ice sheet, and there is no going back once this starts to happen. So when we think about the dangers that we're talking about, the things that will make adaptation more and more difficult, it is these tipping points. Okay, and then I get a little kind of, I'm going to try not to sort of point my finger at all of you too much, but be careful in these conversations, because this is where tipping points is thrown around a lot. And you'll see that it's a very specific thing that we're talking about. And it is something that we in the scientific community are still doing research on, and we are still trying to understand where it is that we get into those tipping points. Okay. Overshoot. This is my second piece. So recall, for those of you that have been in this for a long time, in 2015, we were so excited because the global climate leaders, the UNFCCC, the Paris Accord, said, let's try to come together as a global community and keep the climate system within this 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. So this kind of optimistic line graph where that blue line kind of goes up to 1.5 degrees, because we have done all of these appropriate policies and technologies. And that was the view from 2015, that we could do that. It's almost 2025, 10 years later, and it's pretty clear that we're going to go over 1.5 degrees C. This is the International Panel on Climate Change saying it's almost inevitable that we will temporarily exceed this temperature threshold, but we could return to it below it by the end of the century. So a lot of caution here. And the IPCC, this group of scientists that works so closely with the UN, has scenarios about how quickly or not so quickly we might adapt or create policies that would control and reduce fossil fuel emissions. But they notice that this concept of overshoot, is in nearly all of the ones, that even those that have a favorable outcome by the end of the century. So we're in an overshoot world. And what are we going to do about that? So a group of very esteemed scientists took a hard look at it. And it was not necessarily a really popular, positive things to do. Scientists kept saying, we're kind of the cheerleaders and the energizer bunnies of this whole thing, saying, like, we can do it. We have the solutions, just adopt them. And this group of esteemed scientists, policymakers, et cetera, I think there were about 40 people on this commission, spent a couple of years looking at the issue of overshoot. And it's a hard one to look at, because it's basically not quite throwing in the towel that emissions cutting is failing, but being very realistic that we are not doing it fast enough. And so once again, urge you those that want to know more about this to look at the Climate Overshoot Commission report. You'll see that it has a very carefully designed graphic in here, which says, of course, the very first thing we need to do as a priority is to cut emissions. Second, we need to adapt human and natural systems. And when they say adapt human and natural systems, I think that is the bucket in which we start to talk about the degree to which, by investing in reforestation and restoration of mangroves, we can be taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into natural ecosystems. And of course, you'll notice those are the first two and the highest priority. But it acknowledges that we are going to need to do carbon dioxide removal to address the overshoot. And that carbon dioxide removal are ways in which carbon is removed from the atmosphere, put into deep geologic or oceanographic reservoirs where it will remain for thousands of years. It's expensive. And then the final one you'll see has this tentative word, explore sunlight reflection. Sometimes this is called solar radiation modification, or SRM. Sometimes it's simply called geoengineering. And it is the idea that in a very temporary way, we can alter the atmosphere, increase sulfur aerosols, put more salt spray into the atmosphere, reduce incoming solar radiation, and buy ourselves time. Now, you'll notice that down here, and this is why I get so excited. And when Bill asked me if I wanted to talk to this group, I was like, I jumped at the chance. I think it took about 5 minutes to get back to him and say yes. Science, we can do a lot of science in this space, but it's a question of governance. Like, who decides on solar radiation management? And who is at the table when the decision is made? And how is this weighed against the impacts of climate change versus the potential impacts, let's say, of a geoengineering or a solar radiation modification piece? This is a conversation that we and the communities that we are leaders in, these faith communities, absolutely need to be engaged in. Okay, now there's things that when I do wake up in the middle of the night and worry about all this stuff, there's, we talked about tipping points. There are very positive tipping points. And we know that for many countries around the world, the power sector has passed a tipping point in which the declining price of renewable energy is reinforcing this exponential growth. And what is it? I'm looking down at my notes. 80% of new electricity generation in 2022 came from solar and wind. And it's that positive set of feedbacks where we've got declining prices. It's driving social tipping points where we see electric vehicles and photovoltaics and heat pump systems being put in, sort of, certainly here in the US, all the ways in which, sorry, that's my phone, the way that is increasing sort of a social and cultural piece that makes this not just technically something that is happening, but is becoming a larger and larger piece of how we think about our future. And the positive tipping points are ones that we need to pay attention and get, in my mind, more sophisticated at talking points, because talking about, and I love that I'm in this community of the Interfaith Power and Light, where, we talk about these technologies and we are so taken with them, and we are like bringing them into our own churches and our communities and our own homes. And people are like, well, it's never going to scale. Like, how many of you heard? I can't quite see the Zoom that, like, I'm anticipating, I'm seeing some nods, like, you try to talk to this and it's like, well, this isn't going to work. It's never going to scale. And I think we need to develop the talking points about these positive tipping points, that it's three pieces. We start to avoid activities. So just think about cars. Like, we all started to drive a little bit less. We got our bicycles. We, thought about how we structure our communities. So the kind of services we need are, sort of more walkable. And we got better at that. So our cars became hybrid. Some of them became electric. The price is coming down on that. Or in some communities, the investment in public transportation became sort of better. And then if we think about that, that represents a shift to a more sustainable economy and culture. And that smaller, that circle in the middle, that beautiful white circle, is the system-wide impact that happens, that starts with the simple task of making decisions that avoid emissions and the improvement and the shift. It is within our power. So that's that's your science update for today. But then there's the question of why engage with COP29. So, so imagine here I am, Dr. Lisa Graumlich, climate scientist, sort of telling people that they should be reducing emissions. And then I get on the plane and I fly around the world to meet with, what, at the last COP, there were almost 100,000 people there, people flying all over to come together in this venue to talk about climate change. And it's worse, not that I'm president of AGU. We actually send 4 people there. Like, believe me, this question of why engage with COP29 is a question. And there's a news cycle associated with the COP sometime about next month. The expectations for COP will be raised and the COP starts. And from day one, skepticism and disappointment sort of is brought forward. And I always think of COP as this kind of crazy crucible of like massive hope and deep despair and all the skepticism sort of all mixed up. And I keep going back. So am I just a completely dysfunctional person, or is there a there? I'm gonna argue there's a there. And I'm gonna like indict Susan in this there with me. So there's Susan at COP in the Faith Pavilion, which was a very exciting piece of last year's COP28. There's me at COP27 with my little AGU piece going on. And you'll notice in both cases, we're having conversations. So when you see CNN talk about COP, you're going to see like important people in big fancy rooms having the negotiation. And don't quote me on this figure, but about a quarter to a third of the people at COP are those people in the formal negotiations. The other side events, and I don't even like calling them side events because it diminishes them, because I actually think a lot of the work of the global climate action community is happening outside of those formal negotiation panels. And so here, what you see are, in both cases, we are having conversations, strategizing, planning, building capacity for climate action that is being driven by civil society, in the case of IPL and the Faith Pavilion, faith-based groups. In the case of AGU, it's sort of bringing together the scientists. Increasingly, there are bridges between these civil society groups, and that is what happens. And if you think about it, COP is one of the few places on the international stage where indigenous populations and under-resourced nations are given the opportunity to speak across the table with leaders from global superpowers. And those are the communities that are most at risk for climate change: sea level rise, drought-induced famine, heat-related changes and disease. These are the voices that are elevated in these civil society venues that then intersect with the decision making. So what's going to happen at this next COP? This all starts the same. This is the 29th COP. This is being called the finance COP. And certainly finance is never very far from any of the COPs. You're going to hear a lot about clean energy finance for emerging companies. So in a nutshell, this is going to be a call to quadruple the clean energy investments in emerging and developing countries, to meet their demand for energy in a way that is sustainable. Now, the rub is going to be, these are capital intensive projects. They are very complicated to finance, and it's going to take an unprecedented mobilization of private capital. These aren't things we vote on as citizens with our country's budgets. This is private capital. It's not going to happen overnight. And so what is the role for people, this community of faith? We have to keep pushing for accountability on the part of the private sector. And it's an interesting time because companies who used to be so proud of what they called their ESG criteria and their performance, they were reporting it out to shareholders, environment, sustainability, governance, ESG criteria. I'm watching a little backing away of that, and we need to keep pushing on that accountability. Second piece of this finance bit is going to be discussion of carbon markets. They have become a flashpoint in climate policy, largely because of, frankly, they're really mixed results. On the one hand, they have been a debt-free way to get finance from the heavy emitters, countries and businesses, into promising clean or green projects. On the other hand, there has been, to say it nicely, a lack of rigor that means that carbon markets have not always driven real emissions reductions. Instead, they have pushed funds into, in many cases, unneeded or unverifiable places. At worst, they have been the site of greenwashing and land grabs in the developing world. So what do we do as a faith community? Do we like carbon markets? Do we not like carbon markets? We have to stay informed. We have to demand accountability, and we have to be vigilant about greenwashing and land grabs. Okay, next piece to look for in COP 2029 is the Loss and Damage Fund. Now, I kind of laugh at myself. When I was named as one of the delegates of the Episcopal Church, presiding Bishop Curry, in 3 years ago, for the Glasgow conference, he assigned me to be following loss and damage. I thought, okay, I know what loss is. I know what damage is. I didn't know loss and damage was a thing. So loss and damage is actually seemingly a very general, but it's actually a very technical term in the UN world of negotiation. And it refers to the consequences of climate change that are deeper than anything that adaptation can address. So think of it as a community that loses its coastal heritage sites, its places where elders are buried, the loss of fisheries, the ways in which losses that cannot be compensated happen. At COP28 last year, after a decade, there was a historic move in which a loss and damage fund was agreed upon. At the very first day, it was like this kind of moment of celebration. And it was a very, very hard-won victory, with the continued voice of the developing world and the small island nations saying, you have got to address our absolute losses in this context. And pledges were made about money coming in. The pledges have fallen far short of what is needed. People think that what is needed is about $4 billion per year. So what is the role for faith communities? We have to continue to raise awareness that it is an ethical issue. It is a moral issue. And it's also critically tied to adaptation. So hear me out here. Adaptation are those things we do to get ready for climate change. And I'm going to quote Mohammed Adaw. He's the president of a wonderful think tank that runs out of sub-Saharan Africa. It's called Power Shift Africa. Listen to this. With the loss and damage fund established, here, it may seem like the story is over and countries can pat themselves on the back for the job well done. However, the bill for loss and damage only increases if adaptation is not sufficiently funded and emissions are not urgently cut. It's like balancing scales. If rich nations invest more in adaptation and mitigation, it will keep the loss and damage costs in check. So it's the whole package. It's the reducing emissions, it's funding adaptation, particularly for those places that are not contributing to the problem that we have with climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And it is looking loss and damage squarely in the eye and rising to the justice issue that brings forward. So how do we move forward as community of faith and serve our communities? And I want to reflect a little bit about what this is like for me, knowing that the IPL community has been on the front lines of this forever. We see a community that deals with this, that thinks on an everyday basis about the existential threat posed by climate change, and it will crack your heart open. I live and work in an academic community where I see this in our students, and oh, it's kind of awful. Like, what we're told to do as professors is, oh, yes, acknowledge the grief that your students are experiencing and make sure they get exercise and stay hydrated and go see a counselor and engage in climate action and meditate and exercise some more, whatever. And it's, you've heard this. You're all probably staying hydrated. You're meditating. You're getting exercise, whatever. But I've been long struck. And our message to these students is take care of this yourself. Like this is your problem and you need to fix yourself. And I've come, particularly in my training as a deacon, to appreciate the collective nature of our ministry to our community that needs to be about the collective nature of this grief. And there's many ways we need to respond, but I want to elevate the spiritual practice of lamentation, to lament together as a community. And I'm going to call upon the wonderful words of the Psalms from the Jewish Bible, acknowledging that there are many spiritual traditions in which lamentation is a piece, but this is the one that I'm most familiar with. And one of my favorite theologians, Walter Brueggemann, in a book called Praying the Psalms, talks about Psalms are lament. They're powerful expressions of the experience of disorientation. They express the pain, grief, dismay, and anger that life is not good. And they also refuse to settle for things as they are. And so they assert hope. So I come to you as a scientist and as a person of faith, saying scientists are kind of sell you a little bit of science, what I call solutionism. We're upbeat. We talk about here's the solutions. We just have to implement them. And when I read the Psalms, it speaks to me about actually being much more honest and to think about how much of this science solutionism is kind of a bit of a cover-up. And so in the places where we live, we're expected to speak about this whole issue in an orientation that is about safety. And we pretend that it's going to be okay. Carbon markets are going to work. And those overshoot plans, we're going to figure out how to do them. And for the normal conventional functioning of public life, this raw edges of grief and disorientation must be denied for the purpose of maintaining this public equilibrium. When we talk with other people about climate change, we talk about the progress we're making. And as a result, speaking for myself, I often feel like my speech is somewhat diluted and at times inauthentic. So against this, the speech of the Psalms is, it's frankly abrasive. It's revolutionary. It's dangerous. It announces that life is not like that, and that our common experience is not one of well-being and equilibrium, but it is churning, it's disruptive, it's dislocated, and importantly, when we come together, there's the potential for relocation and reorientation. So I'm a big fan of the way in which, think of Psalms like that, that wonderful metaphor we use of the Japanese pottery that is broken to pieces and is mended with gold. Spiritual traditions of lamentation are that gold. They point to a new social order, which is moved decisively against the idols that are agents of the unjust order. Lamentation helps us in a fractured world. It operates not just in the realm of private emotion and spirituality, but in this larger world of threat and discussion. The world is broken. The work we do can be soul crushing, and we need to heal with that gold. Okay, last slide. So what do we do? I'm asking all of you to do this. You keep hanging out with the scientists. Invite us back. Stay informed. Understand which tipping points are the real tipping points and which ones aren't. Think about climate overshoot and geoengineering and deal with it. Work towards systems and transformation. Take those steps of avoiding, improving, and shifting and talk about it. And finally, work for justice. Demand that those historically responsible for climate change pay for the damage that they have caused. So with that, I look forward to our conversation. And I think I can stop sharing so I can see you all again. There you are. At least there's Susan. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Lisa. You have given us so much to think about. Thank you for this presentation. It was just fantastic. And, you know, despite what I think some folks think about faith and science, I think we like hanging out with scientists. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. Let's keep hanging out with the scientists, and we have to pay attention to the science, and that's certainly been a strong piece of our work at Interfaith Power and Light is relying on the science to guide us. We've got some great questions that have come in, so I'm gonna kind of dive in, and I'm gonna start with one about your faith. So the question is, can you share more about how science informs your faith and why you chose to be ordained at this time?
Well, first of all, there's a science culture that is pretty, like, it's pretty cool to be an atheist, and it's really okay to be an agnostic. And if you're a person of faith, it is often hard to be open about it. And particularly if you're a woman of a certain age in a male-dominated field, the last thing you want is like one more otherness that you have. So my acknowledging my faith and being, I make this joke about, it's a lot easier to be queer in the science community than to go to church. So that's kind of what it's like. So for me, there has been over decades, this very quiet, frankly, developing of both a deepening of faith and a courage and confidence to actually be able to acknowledge that. And that is coupled with a way in which, as someone who has been in the trenches trying to figure out what do we do about climate change for decades now, coming to realize that all of our solutions are only solutions if people actually use them versus us talking about them in papers, and that it wasn't just about engineering. It really was about a set of commitments to a deep set of values that communities of faith hold so dear, that are both about the honoring of creation, but also about loving your neighbor, all of your neighbors, including those most vulnerable. And so all of that came together. And what did I decide to become? Um, I decided to become ordained because I felt that, first of all, in the Episcopal Church, the deacon has this job description that just felt like me. It's like, you are the person that goes outside of the church to bring the voices of the church back in. And like, heck, like that's kind of what I mean, when I first started to talk to my priest back in Seattle about doing this, he's kind of going like, you've been a deacon your whole life. Like, let's just kind of do this. So, it fit like, a comfortable, old sweatshirt, like I could just put on and like start doing it. But I wanted to have that knowledge of, theologically, what is this based on? But the other part for being trained as a deacon is that you have internships in communities that are vulnerable, and the what I learned about ministry and what I learned about what the lives of those who are most vulnerable are like on a day-to-day basis is something that sort of was brought into my whole view on this. So I feel very, very grateful. There's at least one person on the Zoom call that was really supportive of me taking that journey. And and if anybody thinks about wanting to have one of these ordained positions, you can find me.
What a generous offer. I know folks appreciate that. And I love the talking about climate solutions as a very, concrete way to love our neighbors, and especially those who are most vulnerable. And we have a question that came in from one of our folks here, and they say, we, and especially the indigenous and environmental justice communities we work with, often actively resist the extractive colonizer economy. Basically, the argument is that the global economy must end extractivism due to ecological limits. We cannot just replace fossil fuel energy with renewables. Instead, we need systems change and a recentering of justice for indigenous and environmental justice communities. And the question is, how should we address these concerns at the local organizer level? Can the UN effectively address them globally, or is it too closely aligned with the status quo of extraction?
Great question. I mean, beautifully posed, and I am completely aligned with the transformation from an extractive economy to one that is circular and not extractive. And the UN, I mean, I guess I'm being recorded, but hello, like last year was in Dubai, this year's in Azerbaijan. The presence of fossil fuel based lobbyists just ramps up every year. I'm very, very nervous about Azerbaijan because it's a place where civil society is not embraced as participants in governance. Did I say that like politically correct? Like blah, like no, it's a place that is going to be problematic. So I think that the degree to which that drum the the way in which the voices that are locally grounded continue to be present in COP, but I am very skeptical that COP will, as an organization, do that. But I think the coalitions that form in COP are the places where the action will take place.
I think that was a very diplomatic answer. And my experience is I agree with you. Having also attended the last few COPs, and IPL is an observer organization as well. And I think, my stance has been that one of the reasons we continue to show up, even though we know, as you said, there's a carbon cost to our going, is because if we cede the space and we don't show up, others who don't have the world's best interest at heart are more than willing to step in and take those spots and be there. So I think it's an important witness that we provide as people of faith, faith-based organizations, but also many, many observer organizations to be in that space. And to speak at all of those events, like you named. And we have another COP question, so I'm going to just go ahead and pose that one to you, which is that COP29 happens right after the US election this year. So how can we prepare in light of such vast uncertainty?
You're reading, whoever wrote that, like, reads my mind. And actually, to be honest, I mean, that is such a good question. In this leadership group of the AGU, which is the world's largest professional organization of earth scientists, there are 100,000 people involved in AGU. And so, like, I have this great board, meets in 2 weeks, and we are asking that same question. All that is to say, it's a very astute question. And what we have been doing is like scenario planning around different outcomes, including the outcome that we may not know the results of the election as COP starts. And we're looking at two very radically different situations, one in which the US would probably withdraw from continued COP involvement, and another one in which there's going to be perhaps not as full-throated as we want, but some pretty full-throated sort of embrace of COP. And this is why IPL, I'm pointing up at Susan, IPL, other places, the civil society needs to keep showing up, because in the end, I would say we are doing as much, if not more, towards the goals that we commonly have in these, we call it sort of the civil society bucket, in this really dynamic group that convenes together and shares solution strategies. And it's very exciting. And Susan does this great blogging when she's there, et cetera. So no matter what, we're going to show up, and I hope it will be more positive, obviously.
Mm. Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns. There's definitely a lot of unknowns right now. We have another question from someone who it's sort of I think, a very practical question. It's distressing that American policy dialogue still focuses on gas prices instead of transitioning off of fossil fuels. This person says, I feel we're in a bubble preaching to the choir. How do we raise awareness to the general public when the news of climate catastrophes is not doing it?
So a lot of what the coalition building around reducing fossil fuels, the most effective coalition building to me is when we talk about how that is coupled with making communities more livable, pleasant, beautiful in and of itself. And so when we talk about sort of greening communities that traditionally have not had as much tree cover. We're sort of talking about a sort of carbon sequestration, but we're also talking about making playgrounds like I'm living in Tucson, playgrounds that you can actually play in versus that are just cement that are sort of heating up. When we have the ability to walk and ride bicycles, to do our day-to-day life, the sort of health co-benefits. And so that whole way in which individual and community co-benefits are part of is where we walk into the discussion, I think is where we need to go. But once again, I think this community that assembles around IPL, I want to make sure that I'm sure there are lots and lots of other ways, but that co-benefit conversation and leading with the co-benefit to me is the way we go.
It's a great answer. And super quickly, one more question for you. Some folks are asking, there's a little bit of book recommendations going on in the chat. I see folks are wondering if you have any book recommendations that you would send out to all of us that you think are really inspiring for you at this time.
Well, it's funny because I almost brought my my books here, and I get tempted. Like here we are. I could take you to the next room. I am a big fan. Now I'm talking about things that I see all of us as people that are out in community. Heidi Roop, ROOP, Climate Action Handbook. It's well priced. It is beautifully designed. And remember that like steps about like shifting. Heidi, I swear there's something for everybody in that climate action handbook. And then there's a set of books. I know Catherine Hayhoe, who I'm sure has spoken with you before, and others. What is the name of the green book about hope? It's an edited volume. All We Can Save. Yes. Okay. Big hand. Thank you. That is really important. Hannah Ritchie's book, The Data Scientist, that talks about sort of technical solutions. Oh man, I should have been more ready for this. Is great. It's a little bit towards that solutionism and doesn't really deal with the geopolitical and cultural pieces of it, but is good. We all sit in these communities where our uncle across the table at the dinner like wants the data and others want to talk about their anxiety, and you've got to be ready for both conversations.
So insightful. Yes. One more book I would put on the list, same author as All We Can Save, brand new off the press yesterday. What If We Get It Right?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Elizabeth Johnson. So yeah, somebody just dropped that in the chat as well. So another great one to look forward to that can help us really see what we can do. And I think that can be very inspiring to folks. And like you said, we have to do the both and. We have to address the climate anxiety and grief that is real and that is paralyzing for many people to take action, and also point to the solutions that are actually happening now, that can inspire people to continue to build on that. So I know we're out of time. I could continue this conversation with you for such a long time. It's been wonderful. Dr. Graumlich, I want to thank you, and I want to invite you if you have any closing words that you'd like to share with us as we conclude our time together today.
I think if I have one bit of closing advice, which is this is important work, and it can be distressing, and I think dealing sort of the sort of self-care and spiritual care that we talked about at the very end is so important. And so I'm kind of giving you that parental I'm looking at all of you saying, please do take care of yourself, because this is a marathon, not a sprint, and we need each other as a community. and we need you to show up. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. And thank you, Dr. Graumlich. It has been so inspiring to be with you today. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the chat, and folks are sending you some love right now. So I want to thank you again. I want to thank our team at IPL for putting this webinar together for our supporters. We are really, really blessed that you joined us today. I hope that you are leaving here with something that will sustain you for the marathon as we continue together. So take good care, everyone. Thank you for being here, and blessings on the journey.